This is CNN Breaking News.
Hello, I'm Wolf Blitzer in Washington, wherever you're watching from around the world. Thanks very much for joining us. We begin with breaking news. It's crunch time in the Republican push for a massive tax overhaul. The House of Representatives set to vote any moment, and Republicans are very optimistic. They have the votes to pass their tax plan. We expect to hear from the House Speaker Paul Ryan shortly. We'll bring you that live. President Trump, meanwhile, made the trip to Capitol Hill to rally Republicans just ahead of the vote in the House. The president is counting on tax reform as he looks for his first major legislative accomplishment as we await the vote. Let's take a look at some of the highlights from the House version of the legislation. It lowers the corporate tax rate here in the United States from 35 to 20%, reduces the number of tax brackets for tax filers from 7 to 4, and limits state and local tax deductions. It does not include the repeal of the Obamacare individual mandate that's included in the Senate bill right now. The average tax cut, by the way, would be about $1,200 next year. It drops to $860 by 2027. That according to the Tax Policy Center. It's been 3 decades since Congress passed a major tax overhaul. House Republicans are cautiously confident that this is indeed their moment. Let's go live to Capitol Hill. Our congressional correspondent, Phil Mattingly, is on the scene for us. Phil, first of all, I assume the Republicans, they are very optimistic. They think they have the votes to pass their version of the tax cuts within the next several minutes.
Yeah, Wolf, that's right. According to senior aides I've spoken to, some members I've spoken to as well, locked in is the words you keep hearing. They are there. They will have the votes. The question now will be how big of a vote can they get? Obviously, they know they're going to lose members. They know particularly some of the Northeastern members, the people who have issues with the state and local tax deduction, will vote no on this. But that's not going to be enough to take down the bill. And they should have a fairly comfortable margin, I'm told. That's a big deal, especially when you look through some of the legislative failures that have happened over the last 10 months. But, Wolf, it's important to note that bill that you read off very well, what's inside of it, is just the first step. There are multiple iterations going around right now. The Senate is obviously moving through their version. So while it is a big step, it is a very consequential step. It is a step that President Trump, as he walked out of his meeting with the House Republican Congress just about 20 minutes ago, said things are going very well, but there are many more steps to come and a lot of hurdles that come with those steps, Wolf.
And there's one version in the House. There's another version in the Senate. The focus will shift to the Senate. Republicans are facing some serious challenges there. Update our viewers, Phil. What's the latest state of play with the Senate bill?
So the Senate bill right now is in committee, and they're moving through it. A lot of amendments going on right now, but there's a couple of elements here that have really started to bubble up, and you understand kind of how complicated this process is. And while the House victory is certainly a big deal, there's a lot left to come. And first and foremost, you had the first opposition to the bill. Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin coming out last night and saying he has an issue with the pass-through entity rates. And that's kind of in the weeds here, but essentially it's smaller business entities that pay taxes through the individual side. Senator Johnson doesn't like where that currently stands. He wants that to change. You have Susan Collins, who has issues with the inclusion of the repeal of the Obamacare individual mandate. You have people like Bob Corker or Jeff Flake who are concerned about deficit issues. You have John McCain, obviously, who helped sink health care over procedural reasons, wants to make sure the process is working well here, too. And then you get into the details of the bill. Wolf, just a few moments ago, earlier this morning, the Joint Committee on Taxation, a nonpartisan group, releasing the details of their analysis of the latest version of the Senate bill. And while in 2019 there is a significant tax cut across all income brackets, by 2021, in large part because of the repeal of the individual mandate, according to this analysis, those making between $10,000 and $30,000 a year would see an increase in taxes. By 2027, anyone making under $75,000 a year, because of the way the individual rate cuts would phase out, would also see an increase. Republicans, Wolf, they're pushing back on that analysis, but you better believe Democrats have seized on that. They are pushing that forward, and that's going to create problems as Republicans try and move through this still very lengthy process over the next couple of weeks, Wolf.
Yeah, even if it passes the House, it's not yet a done deal in the Senate. Very different version in the Senate. Phil, we're going to get back to you. Phil Mattingly is up on Capitol Hill. We're keeping a very close eye on Capitol Hill, where the vote on the House tax plan set to happen any moment. Once again, though, even if it passes as expected, some Republican lawmakers have deep concerns about the current version of the bill. Republican Congressman Tom Reed of New York State is joining us right now from Capitol Hill. Congressman, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Wolf.
You going to vote for this bill?
I am. I'm very comfortable with this bill, working on it in committee, working on it for the last 7 years. This is the moment to move it forward and give the relief to the American people that it's going to represent.
One of the major concerns, though, of Republicans from high-tax states like New York State, you're from Western New York, is the possibility of eliminating what's called the SALT deduction, the state and local tax deduction. That's going to impact, if it goes through and the Senate version completely eliminates it, you have a partial elimination in the House. It's going to increase taxes for a lot of your constituents. Are you deeply concerned about that?
Well, I'm very confident, given where the Senate's complete elimination of the state and local tax deduction is something I will not support and will fight against, that a compromise position, like we see with the property tax deduction retention up to $10,000 for property owners, in our area, that's a lot of relief in Western New York. And I think this is going to get better, in my opinion, through the Senate Conference Committee process that we envision happening as we go forward.
So if the Senate version with a complete elimination of the state and local tax deduction is passed, you will vote against the tax cut, the final version, if it should emerge along those lines?
Yeah, well, if I made my position very clear, I cannot support the complete elimination of state and local tax deduction. So I'm very confident where we are in the House is the first step, and we're going to do even more advocacy to make sure that we're representing the people back home and give them additional relief. If we can get that through the conference negotiations with the Senate, I'm confident we can get there, but we're going to keep fighting. But at a minimum, we have to keep the property tax portion of the state and local tax deduction.
As you just heard our Phil Mattingly report from Capitol Hill, the new assessment from the nonpartisan Joint Committee on Taxation, and you heard him reported people making between $10,000 a year and $30,000 a year would see tax increases by 2021. How do you justify raising taxes on someone making between $10,000 and $30,000 a year?
You know, we'll take a look at that analysis. I really do appreciate the Joint Committee on Taxation and their work, and any final bill is going to take care of that type of conclusion that they've come to, because that is not the intention of what we're doing here. As a Republican member of the Ways and Means Committee, I can guarantee you those folks are going to get tax relief, no tax increases, and as we go through this process, we'll make sure we fix any of those type of consequences.
Congressman Tom Reed of New York, thanks so much for joining us. We have breaking news coming in from the corruption trial of New Jersey Senator Robert Menendez. The judge has just declared a mistrial. Let's go to our justice correspondent, Jessica Schneider. She's joining us now with the latest. Jessica, update our viewers.
Well, Wolf, this is what the judge has just told the jurors right before he dismissed them. The judge saying, I find that you were unable to reach a verdict and that further deliberations would be futile and there is no alternative but to declare a mistrial. So to take you through what's happened today, it was just about 2 hours ago that these jurors, once again, for the second time this week, amid their 15 hours of deliberations, they gave the judge a note saying that they were unable to come to a unanimous verdict. In the past 2 hours, the judge has actually been interviewing these jurors one by one in the presence of Senator Menendez as well as Dr. Melgen and their attorneys. Now, what's interesting is they got through the foreman of the jury. They got through jurors number 1 and 2. But it was juror number 3 who was inside the judge's chambers, apparently being interviewed by the judge for a grand total of 40 minutes. That is an extensive period of time for a juror to be interviewed one-on-one. So one might take from this that it was juror number 3 who perhaps was maybe the lone holdout or one of the holdouts here, and perhaps in expressing their views, their thoughts on this deliberation to the judge determined there was no way that this juror was going to change his or her. Actually, it was a female. It was a woman, juror number 3, was going to change her mind. So the judge, after talking with this juror, has in fact declared a mistrial in this case, saying it would be futile for these jurors to continue any more deliberations. And just to really point out, Wolf, this is a very difficult case here. This was a bribery and corruption case against a sitting senator, a Democratic Senator, Bob Menendez from New Jersey. And what's difficult about this case is in 2016, the Supreme Court actually decided that to convict on these types of bribery and corruption charges for a public official, there has to be a very specific quid pro quo. There has to be a specific payment for a specific act. And what was alleged in this case of Senator Menendez was that he had this 25-year friendship with a doctor who often flew him on the private jet to different locations, Paris, Florida. And in exchange, prosecutors argued Senator Menendez had meetings with Obama administration officials, may have tried to influence official acts that may have benefited Dr. Melgen. The problem with this case is it was a little bit of a muddied situation here. The defense team argued, look, this was a 25-year friendship. There was no specific quid pro quo here. It was merely Senator Menendez acting because he believed that some of these issues raised perhaps by his friend, Dr. Melgen, they needed to be addressed. So these are very difficult cases here. We've already seen in the Second Circuit involving New York state lawmakers, convictions for this type of charge overturned because of that 2016 Supreme Court case that really refined what it would take to define official acts and to actually convict on a corruption or bribery charge. So to recap for you, Wolf, this case against Senator Menendez has been declared a mistrial. It's unclear at this point if government prosecutors will aim to go back and try this case again. It may come down to exactly how many holdout jurors there were and whether or not those jurors wanted to acquit or convict. So this trial, for all intents and purposes, is over. The question being, will the government attempt to, or will they decide to retry this case against Senator Menendez? But for now, the defense essentially getting a victory in this mistrial. Wolf?
Good point. All right, Jessica, thanks very much. Paul Collins, our legal analyst. So what do you think, Paul? First of all, your analysis of what we just heard, the mistrial declared in the Bob Menendez trial, and what happens next?
Well, the method of the mistrial was kind of fascinating, Wolf, in that usually the judge doesn't inquire of all 12 jurors. They usually come back with a note. They say we're deadlocked. He'll send them back out to deliberate, and then a second note comes in, and generally that's all that's involved. To have interviewed individual jurors is somewhat unusual. I think that in the long run, I would say it's unlikely that Menendez is going to be tried again unless prosecutors have new evidence or they become convinced that there was only, a single holdout against a strong majority favoring conviction. And the reason for that is that ruling that came down in 2016 makes it extraordinarily difficult now to convict a politician for bribery unless it's crystal clear that something of value is passed to the politician in exchange for a specific promise to do something. This case involves something called stream of benefits, which that was the theory the prosecution alleged, that giving a lot of things to Menendez over a lengthy period of time really had bought his assistance on all matters. And that, the court has held, is too vague. You can't really convict on that kind of evidence. So I think it's going to be a lot harder to convict politicians of bribery in the future as a result of this verdict.
Well, clearly this jury could not convict, and a judge has declared a mistrial. Jeffrey Toobin is with us as well. Jeffrey, what's your analysis, and do you think there will be a retrial?
Well, first of all, I think people who are, not familiar with the legal system are inclined to think of it's a victory for the defense. In federal court, the government wins about 90% of the cases that go to trial. So one that doesn't end in a conviction is certainly a win for the defense. As for whether there will be another trial, again, I think Paul said this. Some of it will depend on how the jury splits. If it was 11-1 for conviction, I think a retrial is likely. If it's 11-1 for acquittal, I think a retrial is unlikely. The Supreme Court decision that Paul was referring to, which comes out of the overturned conviction of the former governor of Virginia, was a unanimous decision by the Supreme Court. The liberals and conservatives alike limited these prosecutions, and it has been absolutely awful for prosecutors. This decision has been a disaster for prosecutors who are trying to stop government corruption, and I think it may simply inspire prosecutors here to throw in the towel because these cases have just become so difficult because of the McDonald decision.
Yeah, which suggests, Jeffrey, that there may not be another trial if it's so difficult to convict based on that unanimous Supreme Court decision. It's a factor that the federal prosecutors certainly are going to have to consider.
Absolutely. And also, this, though, you have to consider that this is a Democratic senator who is being prosecuted now by a Republican Justice Department, although the case was brought during the Obama administration. The political stakes of this case have reduced substantially because New Jersey will shortly have a Democratic governor. So even if Menendez is somehow convicted in a second trial, the new governor, Governor Murphy, will presumably appoint a Democrat. So the fact that Murphy is replacing Chris Christie, a Republican, has lowered the political temperature around this case considerably.
Yeah, that's another important point as well. Dana Bash is with us. Dana, you've been watching the political fallout from this. So Bob Menendez, he's a United States Senator, yes, and he's going to remain a United States Senator.
Definitely for the short term. Look, these are charges that have been dogging him for years. And this is a trial, certainly, that he and his fellow Democrats were dreading. And for a while, because of all the issues that Jeffrey was just pointing out, of how difficult it is to try and convict any politician in a public corruption case, they weren't really sure inside Team Menendez if this would actually come to trial. Well, it did. And no question, a mistrial is not, or a hung jury is in no way saying that he's innocent, but it certainly isn't saying that he's guilty, and that it has to be and will be taken as a victory for Senator Menendez and for his allies on Capitol Hill and for his whole team. And at the end of the day, this was another, just on the pure politics of this was another sort of wrinkle, big wrinkle, that Democrats were a little concerned that they would have to deal with. If he was convicted, what would they have done? What would have happened? Would he have resigned? Would he have to be expelled? And then until January, there's a Republican governor in New Jersey, Chris Christie. So it would probably be a short-lived Republican in the seat, but that's all moot now.
Yeah, I'm sure he's going to make a statement, Shannon, saying, you know what, in our country, you're innocent until proven guilty. In this particular case, he has not been proven guilty, at least not yet. Let's change gears. Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, is speaking on the House floor in advance of this very important vote on tax cuts, the legislation before the House of Representatives. He's addressing his colleagues.
We are in a generational defining moment for our country. And what we're doing here is not just determining the kind of tax code we're going to have. What we are doing here is determining the kind of country we're going to have. And right now, because of this anemic economic recovery, I mean, don't forget, we had the worst recession in our lifetimes in 2008. And ever since then, this economy has been flat. This economy has been way under its potential. This economy has been growing at a limp 1% to 2%. And you know what that means for hardworking taxpayers? You know what that means for Americans? Nobody gets a wage increase. Living standards are stagnant. Economic anxiety is high. 78% of our workers in this country today are living paycheck to paycheck. Most Americans say that they don't even have $500 in their bank account for an unexpected emergency or an expense. This is the economic anxiety that's for real in this country today. Instead of thinking about getting ahead, families are just struggling to get by. Think about all the moms and the dads and the hardworking taxpayers going to bed tonight, not sleeping, worried about what comes next week. This is not how it should be. This is not how it is in this country traditionally. We need to restore growth. We need to restore opportunity. We need to restore this beautiful thing we affectionately call the American idea. Passing this bill is the single biggest thing we can do to grow the economy, to restore opportunity, and help these middle-income families who are struggling. People always ask, well, what's in it for me? You know, how do I benefit from this? Well, I'm a chart guy. Why is this important? What this shows you, under this plan, the average family at every income level gets a tax cut. A tax cut at every average level. And what this chart shows you, the people here who are struggling, The people here who are in middle income brackets, the people here who are low income trying to become middle income, they get the biggest tax cut. This plan is good for people of all walks of life, all across the country, and the bigger relief goes to those who need it most. Let's put it into numbers. A typical household of 4 people, they make $59,000 in this country. That family of 4, $1,182 tax cut first year alone. The median family income, mom, dad, 2 kids, the median family income in America today is $87,000. That family will get a $1,941 tax cut right away, year 1. So if you're one of those 57% of Americans who say you don't even have $500 to go to an emergency, this really helps you. Let's talk about those people who itemize their taxes, who live in high tax states. Let's talk about maybe a couple making $115,000, living in a high tax state. Let's say they've got $8,400 in a mortgage interest payment and $6,900 in property taxes for the year. They can still write all of those off under this plan, and they will still see a tax cut of $1,130. If they got kids, an even larger tax cut. Not only do people get to keep more of their own money in their own pocket, but we dramatically simplify the tax system. We make it more fair. Today, 7 out of 10 Americans don't itemize their deductions. That means 70% of Americans take what we call the standard deduction for their taxes. And it's just that. It's standard. It's straightforward. You're not taxed on that income. But over the years, Washington has piled on special interest loophole after special interest loophole after special interest loophole. And these loopholes are skewed to the people who are wealthy, who are well-connected, who can afford all the tax lawyers and all the accountants to navigate the tax code so they can get a good deal. But if you're not in that group, if you don't have the lawyers and the accountants, and you're just scraping away in your middle income, you don't get those deals. So what we want to do is take those loopholes away, make it fair for everybody, lower tax rates, and make it easy. Here's how easy this gets. We're going to make it so easy that by doubling the standard deduction, 90% of Americans, 9 out of 10 Americans will be able to fill out their taxes on a form the size of a postcard. And what this means is, for a single person, you don't pay taxes on your first $12,000 of income. For a couple, for a married couple, you don't pay taxes on your first $24,000 of income. And here's the basic philosophy. Instead of jumping through all the hoops that the IRS puts in front of you, instead of doing what the special interest groups say you need to do in order to get some of your money back, we basically say, keep your money in the first place. It's your money. Do what you want with it. All of this is about tax relief. It's about fairness. It's about simplicity. It's about easing the stress and anxiety that's in this country. But what we really need to do is we need better jobs, more jobs, faster economic growth, higher wages. And this brings us to the way we tax ourselves as businesses. This brings us to, what do we do to make America the most competitive place in the world? Here is the real problem we've got when it comes to the way we tax our businesses. We're the worst in the world at it. We right now tax our businesses at the highest corporate tax rate in the industrialized world. What does that do? Well, let me give you an example where I come from. In Wisconsin, the example is Johnson Controls. Johnson Controls is a company with a history dating back in our state to the 1880s. It was the biggest company we had headquartered in Wisconsin. Not anymore, because Johnson Controls is an Irish company, and their Irish tax rate is 12.5%. This is happening all over the country. Companies, just to stay competitive, are becoming foreign companies. And when the headquarters of that company leaves your hometown, when the headquarters of that business and that employer leaves your state and goes to another country, there goes the United Way campaign. There goes the white-collar jobs. There goes the manufacturing. There goes the research and development. There goes America's competitiveness. What's worse is all these foreign companies are buying U.S. companies because it's cheaper because of taxes. So here's what we do. Instead of being the worst in the pack, we leapfrog ourselves by bringing that tax rate down to 20%. Because guess what? When you tax your businesses at much, much higher tax rates than our foreign competitors tax theirs, they win and we lose. We got to stop losing. We got to start winning. That's what this does. What's even more impressive about this is it lowers taxes for those small businesses, those mom and pops, even more. So we got to make sure that our businesses, the job creators of America, have every incentive to stay here, have every incentive to build here, have every incentive to hire here. And what's more, we're finding that by doing this, we're going to get faster economic growth. We're going to get more jobs. We're going to get higher wages, better take-home pay. Let me just break it down in simple numbers. Tax Foundation, they ran the numbers. Nonpartisan Tax Foundation said, with this bill, we'll get faster growth, about 3.5% faster economic growth, about 890,000 new jobs. They estimate that in New York State alone, 57,834 new jobs. Wisconsin, 17,999 new jobs. California, 422,000 new jobs. Texas, 74,037 new jobs. And you get these new jobs when you grow this economy. You pass this bill, you grow this economy. And so why do we do all of this? Because it's about giving people more take-home pay. It's about raising wages. It's about helping families who are struggling to get ahead. It's about getting Washington out of the business of picking winners and losers and giving the American people the kind of economy they deserve, the kind of economy we can have. This just shows you that across every income scale, across the board, wages will go up because we're going to grow the economy. And most of the wage growth goes to the people who need it most, people who are in the middle, people who are struggling. That is why we're here. My colleagues, right now, we are in the middle of a long day where people are working tooth and nail in their jobs. We are right here in the middle of a day where America's workers are trying to figure out how they're going to make ends meet, how they're trying to keep up with everything. Those people, the hardworking taxpayers of this country that we represent, that is why we're here. This is why we're doing this. They are the foundation of this country. We're here today for them. The special interests are trying to protect their piece of the pie. All the negativity you see out there, there's probably a special interest group back there trying to keep their special niche in the tax code. It is fine time, it is high time we root that out, we don't settle for the status quo, and we give people the kind of tax code that they need and they deserve. It has been 31 years since we last did this. And it is finally time that we get the general interests of this country to prevail over the special interests in Washington. So we know that this brings more fairness. We know that this increases take-home pay and bigger paychecks. And we know that this grows the economy and creates more opportunities. Faster economic growth is not going to fix every problem America has. But faster economic growth is going to help us solve every problem America has. My colleagues, I ask you today to raise your gaze and do something bold, to see the forest through the trees, to think about the people we are here to actually represent, to think about the people who are struggling, who are going to go to bed tonight and probably not sleep because they're worried about what's going to happen tomorrow. That's what this is. This is one of the most historic and the biggest things that we will ever do. And the reason is because this is one of the biggest things we can do to improve people's lives, to revitalize that beautiful American idea, to spread liberty and freedom. This is something that's going to refresh our confidence in ourselves and our confidence in each other. Enough settling, enough giving in. Let's start to reclaim our future right here, in this moment, in this chamber, in this moment. Let's pass this bill. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
All right, you've been listening to the House Speaker Paul Ryan on the House floor. He's selling the Republican tax plan. It's expected to pass in the House. The vote is now. The roll call is about to begin. That should last for about 20 minutes or so. The mystery, though, the real mystery is not in the House of Representatives. It's in the Senate. A different version. The race to find Republicans in the Senate to make sure their version of the bill passes. That will take place over the next several days as well. The House vote, once again, now underway. Stand by for that. But there's more breaking news coming from Capitol Hill right now involving, this time, Democratic Senator Al Franken of Minnesota. He's now apologizing publicly after being accused of groping and kissing a colleague of his without consent about a decade or so ago. Senator Franken is calling for an ethics investigation into his actions. His accuser, Leanne Tweeden, is speaking right now. Listen to this.
We had the first show in Kuwait, is where we were for the first show. We had a little backstage area, and they had it sort of cordoned off. And we were backstage alone because he's like, okay, we're going to get ready. And then they sort of introduce us. We come through a little backstage door, and then we open up into the crowd on the stage. And the backstage area was actually part of the gym, because that's just sort of how these makeshift places are on these bases. So this little gym, we had this one little corner, kind of like this, with these little curtains, and they just sort of cordoned off this little area. So it was just me and Al backstage, and he had his little props for the rest of his show, for the rest of his little skits by himself. And he's like, well, we need to practice the kissing scene. And I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. And I just sort of blew him off, because I didn't, like, we don't need to practice the kissing scene. It's just a quick little thing, you know. And then he persisted, and he's like, no, we really need to practice the kissing scene. And like, okay, Al, you just turn your head right, I'll turn my head right, we got this, you know, whatever. And he kept persisting, and I'm like, Al, this isn't SNL. We're not really going to kiss, so we don't really have to practice. And he just kept persisting, and it just reminded me of like the Harvey Weinstein tape that you heard the girl when she was wired up for the New York, the NYPD, and he just persistent and badgering and just relentless, you know. And so I was just like, okay, fine, just so he would shut up, you know. And he just sort of came at me, and we did the line, and he came at me, and before you even know it, I mean, you kind of get close, and he just put his hand on the back of my head, and he mashed his face against, I mean, it happened so fast, and he just mashed his lips against my face, and he stuck his tongue in my mouth so fast. And all I can remember is that his lips were really wet, and it was slimy. And in my mind, I called him fish lips the rest of the trip, because that's just what it reminded me of. I don't know why. And he stuck his tongue down my mouth, and I remember I pushed him off with my hands, and I just remember I almost punched him, so, because every time I see him now, like, my hands clench into fists, and I'm sure that's probably why. And I said, if you ever do that to me again, I'm not going to be so nice about it the second time. And I just walked out away from him, and I walked out, and I just wanted to find a bathroom, and I just wanted to rinse my mouth out, because I was just disgusted, you know. It was just one of those, I don't know, I was violated. I just felt like, you know, he betrayed my trust, and obviously that is not what I wanted, and I felt like he wrote that just to get that piece in, because he knew he wasn't going to get it on stage, and that was why he was badgering me to do it then when we were alone, because that's what he wanted. And then, you know, 5 minutes later, we had to go out on stage. And I always joke, I've never been an actress. So people always think when you're in Hollywood, I was a model, and then I was a television host. And people are like, oh, you're an actress. I've never been an actress. That's a whole different set of talent, and I don't act. And I had to be an actress. You know, I had to go out on stage with this guy who just did this to me 5 minutes before and act like he's my best friend, and Al Franken, ladies and gentlemen, and this is the greatest thing ever, and do our lines, and trust me, he didn't even get close to my face when we had to come in for the kissing scene. And it's funny, because when this whole Harvey Weinstein thing came out in the last like 2 weeks, when I was deciding, is this the time I tell my story? And I was just looking online and trying to find videos, and you know, recalling everything that happened in my mind from this time 10 years ago, 11 years ago. And I found a blog of a soldier who was at one of our shows in Afghanistan or Iraq, and he just talks about his experience at the show just as a guy in the audience. And he said, Al Franken and Leanne Tweeden were great co-MCs, and Al told a couple of jokes, and then Al goes in for a kiss or more from Leanne and fails. And I just thought, yeah, that's exactly what happens. And he failed every time, because that's what happens on stage. And I thought it would be, the joke would always have been, to me, the funny part was, it would have been like Al would have, in my mind, Al would have just come in for a kiss, and I would have turned my face, or I would have put my hand on his mouth, and that would have been the funny part, right? That would have been like this old guy coming in for the kiss from the hot girl or whatever. The skit would have been to these young troops, and it would have been funny because it was comedy, right? Obviously, it turned out completely different, but, so I had to act my way through the rest of the shows for the next 2 weeks, 10 days, 2 weeks. And I just made sure I was never alone with him again. I didn't tell the Sergeant Major of the Army what happened. I didn't tell our USO rep, because what was I going to do? Be the troublemaker? Be like, okay, I'm going to MC every part of the show for the hour except the 10 minutes I'm on stage with Al? I just sucked it up. I'm a strong girl. I'm a sportscaster, so I deal with guys every day. I'm just going to fake it and act like an actress and do this part with him, and then not talk to him for the rest of the tour. I mean, it was a big tour with a lot of people. I didn't socialize with him. I didn't talk to him for the rest of the tour. I made sure I was never alone with him again. I mean, we're in tight quarters, but there were a lot of people around, so I just made sure I was never alone with him again. And so I didn't have to deal with him in that respect again, other than when we were on stage. And then, little petty things that I had to deal with, just snide comments. We would do autograph sessions after the shows. Of course, they would set up tables. And because there would be sometimes thousands of troops at an event, and we would only have so much time. So there would be long tables for all the, the country music artists and the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders, who were very popular, by the way. And then, instead of like trying to have a single file line of 1,000 guys trying to come down and get everybody's autograph, they would open it up to where everybody, if you wanted somebody's certain autograph and there was only time for people to wait in one line, they would just open it up to where people could just stand in the line that they would want, instead of filing it through like this. So sometimes there would be, honest to God, nobody in Al Franken's line. So people would line up. The girls would have long lines. Some of the country music artist guys would have long lines. So I would always be sat next to Al, because that's just how they always set it up. And so I would always sort of have my back to him and whatever, and I'd be sitting next to the other people. And we'd have lines, we would sign autographs, and I mean, it was just hours of signing and taking pictures with troops. And one time he didn't have people in his line, and I would see things out of the corner of my eye, and I'd see, like a hand and a picture. One of my autograph pictures go like this, and and I would look over one time, and one time I would just see, and a picture would come back, and it would be, my face with devil horns and the devil tail and the pitchfork and the goatee, and I mean, these are the things I'm dealing with, right? Like, he draws me as the devil. I'm like, okay, childish, belittling, whatever. It's just like, that's 2 weeks of this is what I'm getting at. Sorry. And so whatever. So I make it through the 2 weeks of that, and then we're on our way home. We leave, pretty sure it's Bagram Air Base. We're leaving out of Afghanistan, and every time you take off from a base when you're in the middle of combat, you always wear a Kevlar helmet and a flak vest, because when you leave from in the middle of a war zone, you do wear your gear, because small arms fire, or even an RPG like a rocket-propelled grenade can pierce the armor or pierce the skin of an airplane. And so a lot of times you either sit on Kevlar or you wear it because you can be shot at through a plane. So you're wearing it as you take off until you get high enough altitude where you're out of that reach, and then you can take it off. So I'm wearing it. I fall asleep, because I can fall asleep usually before the plane even takes off. So I'm sleeping up against the side of the plane. And And in the photo, if you see the photo, beside me is Mark Wills, a country singer. He's also asleep. So I'm sleeping, which anybody that knows me, I sleep anywhere, anytime. So I'm asleep. And there are photographers on the trip, and I'm pretty sure it was probably the photographer of the tour that took the picture. But they give you CDs as you leave that have, you know, behind the scenes photos of you on the entire tour that they give you when you leave. And I get this and I open it up when I get home. I probably opened it the next day. And it was a photo of Al doing his, you know, this on my breast, like looking at the camera, just kind of smirking and smiling, like, hey, look at me. And I took that as the, you know, the final, like, like I got the last laugh. You know, I mean, he knew I wouldn't see it until I got home and, you know, was away from everybody else. And you know, like I said, to know it in the context of the entire trip and what happened in the entire 2 weeks is telling to me, and just the fact that he just thought he could get away with it, and that it was okay, and that it was funny. And you know, I knew all these years later that, oh well, I thought it was going to be funny. You know, I thought, you know, oh, the comedian, I thought it was going to be I thought it was a joke, I was in bad taste, or I thought it was going to be funny, and I guess it wasn't, or, you know, it was poor taste, or whatever. I mean, nothing like that is ever funny. I mean, is it funny if he does that to your sister, or your daughter, or your wife? I mean, that's just all of those things. But like I said, in context of already assaulting me backstage, and all the little petty things he was doing to belittle me, and how he treated me, and sort of, you know, in succession, and then it ended with that, and then how I was left to feel like, without being able to say whatever I needed to say to his face, that's how I, you know, I'm like, oh, great, while I was sleeping you do that to me, and then I can't even say anything to him. So that's just sort of how it all happened and how it finished.
So when he says in his statement, and he's issued 2 statements.
All right, strong words from Leanne Tweeden. She's a radio anchor, KBC Radio in Los Angeles, making these allegations, saying that the senator from Minnesota, Al Franken, kissed and groped her without consent a decade or so ago during a USO tour in the Middle East. He has now formally apologized. He's acknowledged that all of what she is saying, basically, he has now acknowledged doing. I want to go to CNN's MJ Lee. She's up on Capitol Hill, where we're getting a lot of reaction to these truly explosive allegations. Now, bipartisan calls for an ethics investigation. Actually, MJ, hold on for a second. See, Abby Lowell, he's an attorney representing Senator Bob Menendez, speaking right now. I expect to hear from Senator Menendez a mistrial in that case in Newark, New Jersey. Let's listen in to Abby Lowell.
People interviewed in the United States and other countries, with more than 2 or 3 dozen grand jury witnesses, with more than 500,000 documents that have been obtained by the government, with over 50 witnesses at a 9-week trial, and with all the rulings that occurred in this court for the last 9 weeks. This jury could not, would not, and did not return a verdict that validated any of the government's charges. And at the end of the day, the fundamental reason for that is that this is what happens when you put a real 25-year friendship on trial.
Well, first and above all, I want to thank God, because it is by His grace that I was delivered from an unjust prosecution. I want to thank my children, Alicia, who is here every day with me in court, and who brought my lovely granddaughter, Evangelina, to New Jersey so that I could remember what I had to fight on for. my son Rob, who testified on my behalf and then joined his sister in court, who kept me company and even let me beat him in a round of golf. I'm so blessed to have two great children. And I love you so much, I can't. I can truly thank you. I want to thank my sister Caridad and her husband Pete. Their presence in the Bible passages my sister would send me every morning were an incredible strength to me. I want to thank the Melgen family, Flora, Melissa, Jesus, for their constant friendship and their faith in our innocence. And I wish my dear friend Sal success in his continuing search for justice. I want to thank my defense team, as well as Dr. Melgen's attorneys. Abby Lowell, the nation's premier defense attorney, who methodically tore apart the government's case. His partner, Jenny Kramer, a former prosecutor turned advocate for justice. Ray Brown, whose insights were invaluable. And his associates, Greg Hilster and Justin Kolbenschlag, who gave their total commitment to our cause. And to Dr. Melgen's defense team, Kirk Orgalski, Murat Hussain, John Cogan, and Sam Stern for their invaluable roles. I want to thank the jury, 12 New Jerseyans, who saw through the government's false claims and used their Jersey common sense to reject it. I appreciate their service. I appreciate their sacrifice and their time away from their family and their professions. I want to thank my colleague, Senator Cory Booker, who has been supportive from day one, traveled the state and spread the good word, was here on the first day of trial, and came and testified and was, in my mind, a profile in courage. I know that many who were close to him urged him not to testify, but it's the measure of an incredible man who was willing not only to use his personal reputation, but take a risk in order to see justice done. He is a public servant of unlimited potential, who could just easily serve our country in the highest office of all of the land. I'll never forget it, Cory, and you have my gratitude and respect forever. I also want to thank Senator Lindsey Graham, my friend and colleague, for once again crossing the aisle and coming to testify as to my character, my truthfulness, and my honesty. And while I know he came as a friend, I appreciate the political capital he used as a Republican to come and testify on behalf of a Democratic colleague. That's rare indeed in today's politics. I want to thank the clergy of all different denominations who stood with me, who strengthened me, and yes, prayed with me. I'm so thankful for your spiritual comfort and support. I want to thank Carrie Magro, a leader in the autistic community, Bishop Jackson, Pastor Sambas, my dear friend and Cypriot leader, all for being character witnesses. I want to thank the hundreds of New Jerseyans who I encountered along the last 10 weeks, who overwhelmingly expressed their support and, more importantly, their prayers. I want to thank my staff, both in D.C. and New Jersey, for their loyalty and, above all, their dedication to the people of New Jersey. Especially Fred Turner, my chief of staff, Mike Solomon, my political director, and Mike Ortega, my special assistant. Now let me say a few things. The way this case started was wrong. The way it was investigated was wrong. The way it was prosecuted was wrong. And the way it was tried was wrong as well. Certain elements of the FBI and of our state cannot understand or even worse accept that the Latino kid from Union City and Hudson County can grow up to be a United States senator and be honest. I can't even begin to tell you how many people have come to tell me that the FBI went to them and asked them, what can you give us on Menendez? That is not what the FBI and the Department of Justice is supposed to be doing. And they were not supposed to be leaking to the press during the early stages of their investigation which violated my rights to a fair process. Now, I've made my share of mistakes, but my mistakes were never a crime. I've learned through this process a lot about our system of justice. It is truly a system of justice you can afford. I understand why so many Americans feel that justice is elusive. But for supporters from across the country who believed in me, who knew who I am and what I stand for, I could never have afforded the millions of dollars this case has cost. So my gratitude to all those New Jerseyans and Americans from across the country who believed in me and helped me mount my legal defense against the millions of dollars spent by the overwhelming weight of the federal government. I've also learned about the incredible weight and power of the federal government and how it can crush you if it wants to. It gives me an even greater resolve to make sure that there is a check to that awesome power. Because where do I go to? What office or department of the federal government gives me back the past 2.5 years of my life? Where do I go to have the damage they sought to incur to my reputation? Where is it? What department is it that replaces it? So let me share some final thoughts. To those who left me, who abandoned me in my darkest moment, I forgive you. To those who embraced me in my darkest moment, I love you. To those New Jerseyans who gave me the benefit of the doubt, I thank you. To those who have a doubt, I'm going to work harder than ever before so that there is no doubt. To those in the press who did their job and did it with professionalism, and even to some of you who are actually kind. Where's Dominic? I don't see him. Dominic? I believe you showed others what a professional press is all about and why that freedom is so important to our society. To those who were digging my political grave so that they could jump into my seat, I know who you are, and I won't forget you. Finally, let me answer the question that I could not answer before the trial was over. Why didn't I testify? There is nothing more that I wanted to do but to tell my story. I am proud of the thousands of people I've helped in New Jersey and across the country who I have helped with their visas, reuniting families, and very often bringing people who were denied so that they could save the life of a loved one. I'm proud of my work to have 100% port scanning, something I have been a champion of and believe is in the vital national security interests of the United States to secure it and to stop the flow of drugs. My fight to save Medicare hundreds of millions of dollars. I believe we can't afford to throw out good medicine when we can carefully administer it to patients. But a trial is not a debate. It's not a public forum. It's a legal proceeding. My testimony on direct and cross-examination would have likely taken days. That means we would have put at risk losing one of the jurors who was told she would be excused to go on a pre-planned vacation. And we collectively felt, by the way she reacted to different parts of the prosecution and defense's presentations, that she believed in our innocence. And we didn't want to lose her. And boy, were we right on that. We still lost her. Secondly, the prosecution would have used me to redo their entire meritless case in chief all over again, including having me read emails and other materials that were not mine, but would have put my voice and my name for their purpose, in essence giving them an additional summation before their final summation. So that was just a small window into my thinking. Anyone who knows me knows that I never seek a fight, but they also know that I never shy away from one. This wasn't a fair fight.
All right, so there you have Senator Bob Menendez. He is obviously totally relieved that there has been a mistrial. We are now told, by the way, of the 12 jurors, 10 of them favored acquittal, 2 of them did not favor acquittal, 10-2 in favor of him. You have to be unanimous, of course, in a trial. Shannon Pettypiece, let me get your reaction. He's very pleased with a 10-2 vote like that. It raises questions whether there'll be a retrial.